Thomas Alive Today presents
Marshall Fields. Marshall Field and Company traces its antecedents to a dry goods store opened at 137 Lake Street in Chicago, Illinois in 1852 by Potter Palmer, eponymously named P. Palmer and Company. In 1856, 21-year-old Marshall Field moved to the booming Midwestern city of Chicago on the southwest shores of Lake Michigan from Pittsfield, Massachusetts, and found work at the city's then largest dry goods firm, Cooley Wadsworth and Company. Just prior to the American Civil War in 1860, Field and bookkeeper Levi Z. Leiter became junior partners in the firm then known as Cooley Farwell and Company. In 1864, the firm, then led by senior partner John Farwell Sr., was renamed Farwell Field and Company, only for Field and Leiter to soon withdraw from the partnership with Farwell when presented with the opportunity of a lifetime. Potter Palmer, plagued by ailing health, was looking to dispose of his thriving business, so on January 4, 1865, Field and Leiter entered into partnership with him and his brother Milton Palmer. So the firm of P. Palmer and Company became Field Palmer Leiter and Company, with Palmer financing much of their initial capital as well as his own contribution. After Field and Leiter's immediate success enabled them to pay him back, Palmer withdrew 2 years later from the partnership in 1867 to focus on his own growing real estate interests on one of the burgeoning city's important thoroughfares, State Street. His brother Milton Palmer left at this time as well. The store was renamed Field Leiter and Company, sometimes referred to as Field and Leiter. The buyout, however, did not bring an end to Potter Palmer's association with the firm. In 1868, Palmer convinced Field and Leiter to lease a new 6-story edifice he had just built at the northeast corner of State and Washington Streets. The store was soon referred to as the Marble Palace, owing to its costly marble stone face. When the Great Chicago Fire broke out on October 8, 1871, news of this, one of the worst conflagrations to ever strike an American city, reached company officials Henry Willing and Levi Leiter, who decided to load as much of their expensive merchandise as possible onto wagons and take it to Leiter's home, which was out of the path of the fire. The company's drivers and teams were ordered out of the barns. Horace B. Parker, a young salesman, rushed to the store's basement, broke up boxes, and built a fire in the furnace boiler so that the steam-powered elevators could be operated. These employees worked feverishly through the night to remove vital records and valuable goods to safety. At one point, the gas tank exploded, which put out the store's gas lights. The men worked on by candlelight and the glow from the approaching flames. The employees got enough steam up to operate the store's powerful pumps in the basement, and volunteers went to the roof and used the store's fire hoses to wet down the roof and the wall on the site of the oncoming fire. Early in the following morning, however, the city's waterworks burned, thus ending the water supply and making further efforts useless. The last employee had scarcely exited the building when it burst into flames, shooting fire from every window. The store burned to the ground. However, as a result of the employees' Herculean efforts, so much merchandise was saved that the store was able to reopen in only a few weeks in a temporary location. 6 months later, in April 1872, Field and Leiter reopened in an unburned building at Madison and Market Streets. Salesman Parker stayed on with the company for 45 more years, rising to the level of general sales manager. 2 years later, in October 1873, Field and Leiter returned to State Street at Washington, opening in a new 5-story store at their old location they now leased from the Singer Sewing Machine Company, Palmer having sold the land site to finance his own rebuilding activities. This store was expanded in 1876, only to be destroyed by fire again in November 1877. Ever tenacious, Field and Leiter had a new temporary store opened by the end of the month at a lakefront exposition hall they leased temporarily from the city, located at what is now the site of the present Art Institute of Chicago. Meanwhile, the Singer Company had speculatively built a new, even larger 6-story building on the ruins of their old 1873 store, which after some contention was personally bought by Field and Leiter. Field, Leiter and Company now reclaimed their traditional location at the northeast corner of State and Washington for the last time in April 1879. In January 1881, Field, with the support of his junior partners, bought out Levi Z. Leiter, renaming the business Marshall Field and Company. as Palmer had before later retired to tend his significant real estate investments, which included commissioning a department store second lighter building in 1891 at State Street and Van Buren to house Siegel Cooper and Company. In 1932 this building was leased to the later famous nationwide mail-order firm Sears Roebuck and Company. In 1887 the landmark 7-story Henry Hobson Richardson-designed Romanesque-styled Marshall Field's wholesale store opened on Franklin Street between Quincy and Adams. Though little remembered today, the wholesale division sold merchandise in bulk to smaller merchants throughout the central and western United States, and at that time did 6 times the sales volume of the local retail store. Chicago's location at the nexus of the country's railroads and Great Lakes shipping made it the center of the dry goods wholesaling business by the 1870s, with Field's former partner from before the war, John Farwell Sr., being his largest rival. It was the scale of the profits generated by the John G. Shedd-led wholesale division during this time that made Marshall Field the richest man in Chicago and one of the richest in the country. Following the departure of Leiter, the retail store grew in importance. Though it remained a fraction of the size of the wholesale division, its opulent building and luxurious merchandise differentiated Marshall Fields from the other wholesale dry goods merchants in town. In 1887, Harry Gordon Selfridge was appointed to lead the retail store and headed it as it evolved into a modern department store. That same year, Field personally obtained Leiter's remaining interest in the 1879 Singer Building, and in 1888 started buying the buildings adjoining his for additional floor space. Marshall Field also had a child at this time. In 1892 the structures between the 1879 building on State Street and Wabash Avenue to the east were demolished, and the famous influential architect Daniel H. Burnham and his firm D. H. Burnham and Company was commissioned to erect a new building in anticipation of the influx of visitors from the world's Columbian Exposition scheduled for 1893. The 9-story annex at the northwest corner of Wabash and Washington Streets was opened under the direction of Burnham associate Charles B. Atwood in August 1893 towards the end of the exposition. In 1897 the old 1879 store was rebuilt and had 2 additional floors added, while the first of Marshall Field's iconic landmark great clocks was installed at the corner of State and Washington Streets on November 26. In 1901 Marshall Field and Company, previously a private partnership, was incorporated. Spurred on by Selfridge, Marshall Field raised the 3 buildings north of it which had been occupied since 1888, as well as the Dankmar Adler and Louis Sullivan designed 1879 Central Music Hall at the southeast corner of State and Randolph Streets in 1901. In their place rose a massive 12-story building fronting on State Street in 1902, including a grand new entrance. In 1906 a 3rd new building opened on Wabash Avenue north of the 1893 structure, which was then the oldest part of the store. In the midst of the construction, Selfridge abruptly resigned from the company in 1904, buying rival store Schlesinger & Meyer, but sold it only 3 months later. Schlesinger & Meyer in 1899 had commissioned the Louis Sullivan designed building now known as the Carson Perry Scott & Company building, which is the firm to which Selfridge sold the business. After trying retirement he went on to establish Selfridge's in London. Marshall Field died on January 16, 1906 in New York City. On the day of his funeral all the stores along State Street, big and small, closed, and the Chicago Board of Trade suspended afternoon trading in his honor. The board of Marshall Field and Company appointed John G. Shedd, whom Field had once called the greatest merchant in the United States, to serve as the company's new president. Shedd became head of a company that employed 12,000 people in Chicago and was doing about $25 million in yearly retail sales, in addition to nearly $50 million in wholesale. Under Shedd's leadership for the next 16 years, Marshall Field and Company continued to rebuild its store, fulfilling plans approved by Field himself to pull down the 1879 structure later in 1906. In its stead rose a new South State Street building with a continuation of the 1902 street facade. Opened in September 1907, it included a Louis Comfort Tiffany decorated ceiling that is both the first and largest ceiling ever built in Favre glass, containing over 1.6 million pieces. With completion of the 1907 building, Marshall Fields momentarily possessed the title of world's largest department store over John Wanamaker and Company in Philadelphia and R.H. Macy and Company in New York. In 1912, the 16-story Trude building at the southwest corner of Wabash and Randolph was acquired and demolished, an act that was considered to be one of the first demolitions, if not the first, of a high-rise skyscraper of those just recently being built. In its place rose the 1914 building designed by the Graham Burnham and Company architectural firm, completing the present-day store and now encompassing the entire square city block bounded by Washington State, Wabash, and Randolph streets. Also in 1914, the same Graham Burnham and Company supervised the opening of a new 20-story Marshall Field annex across the street at 25 East Washington, which housed Marshall Field's store for men on its first 6 floors. These buildings recaptured its status as the world's largest department store, its many restaurants and separate men's and women's lounges becoming an important social destination for upscale Chicago. Shedd continued to expand Field's wholesale business and grew its manufacturing business, buying textile mills in the South in 1911 as well as overseeing the purchase of the Marshall Field Trust's interest in the business in 1917. The Field family eventually retained only a 10% stake. Second company president John G. Shedd retired in late 1922. James Simpson was appointed president following Shedd's retirement. Though considered to have favored a declining wholesale division, he did expand its retail operations, first buying A.M. Rothschild and Company at State Street and Jackson Boulevard in December 1923, which Fields operated as a discount store called the Davis Store. In 1924, the 1893-1914 buildings that the store occupied were acquired from the Marshall Field Trust. The first branch of Marshall Fields itself opened at Market Square in Lake Forest, Illinois in May 1928. In September 1928, its first branch in Evanston, Illinois followed, later relocating to a French Renaissance-style building at Sherman Avenue and Church Street in November 1929. The Oak Park, Illinois store opened in September 1929 in a building similar to the Evanston store. Frederick & Nelson, a Seattle, Washington-based department store founded in 1890, was also acquired in 1929 with its own 1914 downtown Seattle building at Pine Street and Fifth Avenue. Frederick & Nelson retained its name, though its logo was soon rewritten in Field's iconic script. Frederick & Nelson created Frango mints, a Seattle tradition then and now. The mints were later also produced in the Candy Kitchen in the State Street store and became popular in Chicago too. Marshall Field & Company became a public company in 1930, early in the Great Depression. The retailer needed capital due to the expense of opening the massive new merchandise mart to house its flagging wholesale division. Ground was broken in 1927 during the boom years of the Roaring '20s. When the mart opened in 1930, it was the largest building in the world. The 1887 wholesale store designed by Richardson at Franklin between Quincy and Adams Streets was closed and demolished at this time. But the new building, faced with a change in retail distribution and wholesale patterns in addition to the deepening Great Depression, could not save Field's wholesale division. Simpson left the company, and James O. McKinsey, a University of Chicago professor and founder of the McKinsey & Company consulting firm, was hired to reform the company. The wholesale division, once the core of the company, was liquidated by 1936. The Davis store was closed in 1936 as well, and its building was sold to Goldblatt's. In 1939, the land underlying the main State Street store was acquired from the Marshall Field Trust. Meanwhile, McKinsey also reorganized the company's vertically integrated operations, notably by merging the company's varied textile operations under the Field Crest name. Following World War II, the Merchandise Mart building was sold in 1945 to Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., significantly improving the Field Company's finances and enabling the store to cope with the post-war suburban residential and commercial boom. Marshall Fields presciently followed its customers to their new homes outwards to the suburbs, including opening a store in 1950 in partnership with pioneering suburban developer Philip M. Klutznick at his new Park Forest Plaza, which utilized revolutionary new concepts in land use and architecture. In 1956, Klutznick and Fields jointly opened in Skokie, Illinois, a center Klutznick developed on land that Fields already owned. The development included a new Fields store. This was followed by the 1959 opening of a Fields store in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin to the northwest, and stores at later in Oak Brook, Illinois in 1962 and Calumet City, Illinois in 1966. Marshall Fields even expanded further in the Pacific Northwest, acquiring the Crescent department store in Spokane, Washington in 1962, and in 1970 moved east with the purchase of Halley Brothers Co., a leading department store in Cleveland, Ohio. Fields also continued to expand its hometown base in Illinois, opening a store at Woodfield Mall in Schaumburg in 1971. Rockford and Vernon Hills followed in 1973, and Chicago and Aurora opened in 1975. The suburban expansion continued in 1976 with a location in Orland Park, followed by Joliet in 1978. In 1979, Marshall Fields expanded south into Texas with a store in Houston. The year 1980 saw the rapid acquisition of J.B. Ivey Company, a department store chain with roots in Charlotte, North Carolina and Jacksonville, Florida, the Union Company, Columbus, Ohio, the Lippman's stores in Portland, Oregon, and several Liberty House stores in Washington state. Fields' existing Frederick and Nelson unit in Seattle absorbed the Lippman's and Liberty House stores under its name, but after initially merging the Union of Columbus, Ohio with its earlier Halley's stores from Cleveland, Fields decided to sell the combined chain in November 1981. The new owners quickly liquidated it. The early 1980s saw slower expansion, with just 2 store locations in Illinois added, one in October 1980 in West Dundee and one in 1981 in Bloomingdale. Another Texas store opened in Dallas, Texas in 1982. In 1982, Marshall Field & Company ceased to be a public company, being acquired by British American Tobacco. As part of Betis Retail Group, the American retailing arm of British American Tobacco, Fields and its Frederick and Nelson Ivies and the Crescent department stores and the John Bruner's home furnishings stores joined retailers Gibbels, Saks Fifth Avenue and Kohl's. Fields continued to expand under Betis, adding stores at Houston in 1983 and San Antonio in 1986. Only 4 years after buying Marshall Fields, however, Betis scaled back its retail operations in 1986, selling Fields' former subsidiaries Frederick and Nelson and the Crescent to a local investor group. Frederick and Nelson quickly deteriorated and became defunct in 1992. Its 1914 building, the one acquired by Fields in 1929, was eventually bought by Nordstrom. The structure was renovated and reopened in 1998 as a replacement for Nordstrom's own Seattle parent store. Betis closed its Gibbels division in 1986 and transferred 5 former Gibbels locations in Wisconsin to its Marshall Fields division: downtown Milwaukee Northridge Mall and Southridge Mall in Milwaukee, Hilldale Shopping Center in Madison, and in downtown Appleton. The former Gibbels Northridge and Southridge locations were retained by Fields for only 3 years. Due to poor performance, they were sold in 1989 to H.C. Prange Company of Sheboygan. The Evanston and Oak Park stores were closed in 1986, their 1929 buildings deemed out of date and too costly to operate. A major restoration and renovation of the State Street flagship store, led by Director of Construction and Maintenance Bill Allen, commenced in 1987. Betis initially kept Saks Fifth Avenue, Marshall Fields and Ivies. However, it sold all its remaining U.S. retail assets in 1990, with Saks going to Bahrain-based Investcorp, Ivies sold to Dillard's, and Marshall Fields sold to then Dayton Hudson Corporation, now Target Corporation. Dayton Hudson Corporation renamed itself Target Corporation in 2000 and renamed its Dayton's and Hudson's department stores Marshall Fields in 2001. These stores were outside of Fields' existing markets. Target Corporation introduced some of the brands carried there to the Marshall Fields stores, displacing some of Fields' more expensive merchandise. In 2004, Target Corporation sold the Marshall Fields chain to May Company, thereby exiting the department store business entirely. It was hoped that aligning with the May Company instead of the discounter Target would let Fields be Fields and allow it to recapture its former cachet and upper-class customer base. However, Federated Department Stores Incorporated that acquired the May Company in 2005. After the Federated purchase, Marshall Fields stores joined L.S. Ayres and existing Macy's stores in the new Macy's North Division. During 2006, all Marshall Fields stores, most Fillings, and all the stores of 9 other May-owned chains were renamed Macy's. The conversion officially occurred on September 9, 2006. Many Chicagoans resented the New York City brand replacing their local brand. Hundreds of protesters gathered under Marshall Field's famous clock that day and returned on the one-year anniversary September 9, 2007. Dozens attended Field's fans' rallies each anniversary from 2008 to 2012. Many Chicagoans felt betrayed by Macy's takeover of Marshall Field's when the company began to change its aesthetics and customer service standards and demoted many Chicago-based brands. In December 2006, Macy's reported 30% slower sales in former Marshall Field's stores. The focus shifted to promoting the State Street location in 2007.
For the $1 million grand prize, here's your final question. What is the capital of Idaho?
Don't let time run out on you. It's Marshall Field's 13-hour sale. You won't want to miss a second to save on all the things you want, store-wide. Marshall Field's 13-hour sale. This Saturday only.
If you have any fond memories, please indicate it at the comments below. Thanks for watching, subscribe, and like.